I'm Jen Alden. I'm the current Mayor of the City of Greater Bendigo. My background is primarily in health, and so I bring that point of view to a lot of the decisions that I make as a councillor. And the council plays a big role in the water sector. We're providing a lot of services, assistance to planning for communities to be built and to grow. We're thinking a lot about the future. So if you think about services, in Victoria, we've got 79 local governments. Bendigo is a big regional city, so we've about 118,000 people, and it goes across 3,000 square kilometres. So we've got things on a scale that actually can be quite a challenge when we're talking about how water moves for our community, how our services are provided. We're watering 100,000 trees on nature strips. We're looking at 300 or more recreation reserves, 170 natural reserves, 70 sporting reserves. So there's water implications for that. And there's water implications when we know that our population of 118,000 people is projected to double almost by 2050. We know that our water availability is going to decrease, maybe 20%, we don't know exactly, but doubling a population and decreasing the water supply is a real issue to contemplate and maybe a problem. And the other role that local government has is in working in partnership with other organisations. So one of the players in that around the table is Colaban Water, of course. So there is a role to play for a lot of big organisations to partner with the council. We know that we need to improve how that actually works for our community. People gravitate to water too, so there's a large element of our health and wellbeing that comes with water, and how we plan for water is very much integral to planning for those spaces that people like to make use of when they're going for walks, etc. That's really important too. Well, to understand our challenges in the future, I think we need to understand our history a bit too. We notice that the landscape that was here, where our Indigenous people lived, the Dja Dja Wurrung, it was described as a series of ponds along some grassy areas alongside a very healthy creek. And so that very rapidly, with the mining industry and the gold rush, turned into a moonscape. All the vegetation was stripped because of the type of mining, and the gold mining extraction meant that the creek got silted up. So the landscape was essentially poisoned. And so we need to learn from that, because even though people brought with them ideas about what we might do to make a settlement work, one example was that Bendigo was known for the tomato industry back in the 1800s. And so there was a lot of plantings of tomato farms all around, a range of different products were made. And then the whole industry collapsed because the water supply wasn't up to what was required. So we know that we can learn from history. So the biggest challenge is that we have a heating and drying climate, and that we're looking at increasing our population while we have these issues arising. And so how are we going to plan for that? What are we going to do when we've built areas where there might not be as many trees as there were before, because now there's houses? We need to plant more trees. And when we do get the rains, they're going to be in a different pattern. So we're actually going to be more prone to flash floods. And that means how we plan to build our communities and where is quite critical, because they have to be flood resistant as well as aware of the fact that it's going to be hotter. So that there's a range of problems that we're going to have to deal with. But some of that can be addressed by working with other people. And I think there's a lot of solutions out there in the community and also with organisations. So I've mentioned something like Colaban Water. We've got an opportunity to look at how we recycle our water, how we make better use of our stormwater. So we've got a lot of opportunities to do things more efficiently and more effectively. But it's not all on us. It actually can also mean that we need to look at what the government's doing and being able to work with some new ideas there. So maybe if everybody had water tanks, maybe if we've got more water efficient devices, we're very careful with how we water and what we use for agriculture, more efficient use of water, then we might find that we've created some efficiencies which actually decrease our demand in the first place. We do have some sort of tensions there with who gets the water. And there are conversations that can be really difficult. Some people will say, why does a golf course have a lot of water? Other people might say, Why would a race course have a lot of water? And why would the mining industry use so much water? So there's conversations that need to be had about who has the right to use what type of water. How can we have an impact on how that thinking happens? And I think that the role of local government is to bring people like that around the table with the community and to look at these issues. We can't go forward doing things in the future based on what we used to do in the past. So we need to have those sometimes tricky conversations to say, well, the community has a right to water for these purposes. And therefore, how do we divide up what might be a bit of a scarce resource in future so it's fair? And that is a conversation that I think everybody has a right to have, because access to water is a human right. We need to remember that. There's organisations or businesses that can come into a town and tap into groundwater and take it away for bottled water, and at the expense of local communities, the local food growing, a range of things. And that creates real tensions about who has the right to make money out of that. And these are issues that local government does have some role to play. Local government doesn't always have the powers that some people might think, but we can certainly either advocate or work with people or magnify the community's voice and know how to direct people's attentions to, if there's supposed to be a planning decision made at a state or federal level, how we can actually support that to change in everybody's interests. There are challenges in these cities in the future with water. And so there's been a very big project for a water sensitive city in Bendigo. And that has brought with it another opportunity to collaborate. And collaborating with some of the people I've mentioned previously, groups like Colaban Water, of course, but with our Indigenous owners, the Dja Dja Wurrung, with DELP, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and with the community and other experts. So we do work with the Dja Dja Wurrung, our traditional owners, and we also are on Tanarung land in the city of Greater Bendigo as well. But the Dja Dja Wurrung have been very big players and a big part in one of the projects I've mentioned, the reimagining of the Bendigo Creek. So if you go along the Bendigo Creek, you'll see some fantastic native vegetation being introduced into some ponds and some frog ponds and some other ways of treating that water landscape. Understanding of what things used to be historically, and that's a really, really important part of reimagining our whole landscape. It does make our landscape more resilient in the future. So by introducing certain types of vegetation, we're also going to be able to retain some of the rain that falls. It acts like a sponge. So being a water sensitive city means we can look at this type of vegetation, learn from what would normally have been there hundreds of years ago, and look at setting some of those places up to be like rain gardens and decreasing some of the damage that's going to be done with these intense rainfalls we're going to have with climate change. So that the storm damage doesn't mean that the water just gets shot right up to the swamps north of Bendigo, that it could actually be soaked into our landscape where it's needed. So that's an immediate effect from working with our traditional owners, but there's so many more. I've mentioned we work with Colaban Water, and we will be working a lot more closely with the economic side of things. And of course, the economic and the environmental go hand in hand. So when we're talking about our climate strategy and all of the big projects and big actions that we're going to be doing in the near future, Colaban Water is a very strong partner in that, and we welcome that. There's the government, and we do have fantastic relationships with the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. Those partnerships allow us to do many things in the climate area, but equally with planning considerations and also the big ideas stuff. So that's really important. Other communities and other local governments will be looking at their individual local issues, but then feeding that back up to the state government, because we have that good relationship. And often to achieve outcomes, you need to have the relationships with where you know the change can happen. However we like to develop those relationships, we know that when we can understand each other better and communicate better, we're going to get much better outcomes, rather than people pushing up against each other and saying, we want this, why haven't we got that? So we need to all be able to speak in a different way to achieve those outcomes. We also have in our setting, I've mentioned the farming community, and even more recently, this council has employed an agribusiness officer. So we've elevated the importance of working to achieve outcomes with our farming community. And we also know that that's going to affect the foods that are grown and what we can do to improve our health ultimately. So I think that's a great idea. We can do a lot to encourage things to be easier for farmers to establish different types of enterprises, maybe with the water corporations, maybe with more recycled water. Maybe we can zone some areas that aren't suitable to be built on to become large-scale local food producing areas, urban farms. So we've got lots of ideas, and I think we can do a lot to help our local community. The practices that we've used in the past are very fossil fuel intensive, very water intensive in some areas, flood irrigating and things that we find as it gets hotter, it's not quite as suitable to do that anymore. So we know we need to change certain practices, and farmers are coming on board with what's called regenerative agriculture, so that we can actually have healthier soils, for example, which will retain more moisture. And when we do that, we've also got healthier soils drawing down carbon. And that was one of the biggest impacts we can have to reduce our emissions. So our soil and the water cycle is absolutely critical. So we've got some wide-scale challenges, but we can do a lot to make an impact. I've recently been re-elected to council, and part of that process means you have to talk to the community a lot about what you think needs to happen in the future. So we have to make sure that we're working with our water corporations to make sure that they're able to produce the amount of water that's going to be drinkable. But equally, when they do some education about how much water we waste, we can reinforce that, and we can talk about the importance of make it cheaper for people to do certain things like putting in a water tank, or for farmers to actually use the water that they use to be more sustainable. And maybe we could give them some discounts on their rates. So local government has a way of providing some incentives. But to do that, when you're elected, there's an issue around how much money do we have? Well, we don't want to go broke as a council. So as you've heard, local government has a lot to do with this sector. And as you play this game, keep some of that stuff in mind, and good luck.